Today I want to talk about intuition and the inner voice because it's something that I deal with a lot, and it's a question that I have. How legitimate is it? What is the source of it? What do I do with it when I hear it? And can I harness it? Because we often speak of intuition as if it's something sacred, like this quiet knowing, this internal compass, like a whisper from the truest part of us. But this is a myth. Not to say that it's false, but it is a romantic and attractive and a persistent myth. And the reality of intuition is that it's it's both more useful and more humbling than that. It's a compression algorithm. The Our intuition and our inner voice is a layered stack of pattern recognition and survival bias and social conditioning and memory and trauma. And intuition is really not the voice of your soul. It's the output of your system. And to understand it clearly, we have to move away from the spiritualized metaphors that saturate modern self-help and look at intuition through the lens of cognitive science and philosophy and developmental psychology. Because what we call the inner voice is not pure, it's programmed, and therefore does not always deserve to be listened to as if it were just coming to us unmediated as a conduit from the divine, but rather telling us something about how we were shaped to interface with our present circumstances. So, I like to think of intuition and the inner voice through this one concept, which is it's heuristics in disguise. So, really well-known book. If you haven't read it, I recommend Daniel Kahneman, his book Thinking Fast and Slow. He defines intuition as the product of System 1 thinking, which is fast, automatic, associative processes that operate below conscious deliberation. And these processes are very efficient, but they're also riddled with bias. We call this gut feeling that we have. This is often the shorthand of past experience. It's useful when contexts match and dangerous when they actually don't, but we think they do. So when your intuition tells you not to trust someone, it may be ancestral pattern recognition, or it may be implicit bias. When it tells you to seize on an opportunity, it may be genuine clarity, or it might be addiction to volatility. The point isn't that intuition is wrong, it's that your intuition is not neutral. So, philosophically, where does this concept of the inner voice come from? Because we think that it's just been handed down to us ever since the birth of consciousness, that there is such a thing as the inner voice. But it's kind of a recent notion. The idea of the inner voice as sacred does have a long history, but it's still somewhat short within the history of human thought. So there's the Socratic daimonion. There's the Christian concept of the conscience. There's the romantic concept of authenticity. Each of these frames the interior voice of the mind as a truth-tethered guide. But I have a love-hate relationship with Soren Kierkegaard. He, in his book In Sickness Unto Death, he warns that selfhood is not something found, but something formed. And that the self that we mistake for essence is often a composite of fear and crowd thinking and performative self-concept. So a philosopher I've mentioned before, Martin Heidegger, in Being in Time, pushes this concept even further, that the inner voice is usually not our own. It's what he calls the they self, which is a default mode of self-understanding shaped by others and institutional expectations and cultural drift. To listen to ourselves, then, is not enough. We have to actually interrogate what self is doing the talking. So let's push further into this concept of intuition by framing it as embodied cognition and the voice of the body. So in this great book called Descartes' Error by Antonio Damasio, he dismantles this strict mind-body split between inner voice and self. And he says that arguing that what we call rational decision-making is really inseparable from embodied feeling. And that gut feeling is not metaphorical, it's actually literal. So intuition often arises as a somatic signal, as a tightening in the chest, a pull towards or away. But the body, like the mind, can be conditioned by trauma and fear and habituated avoidance. Not every contraction is wisdom. Not every urge is alignment. To trust the body is not to obey it, it is to learn its grammar. So, how do we move towards epistemic hygiene? What do we do with all of this? Well, we don't discard intuition, we refine it. First, we have to treat every inner voice as a hypothesis. We ask, what system is generating this signal? And is it protective? Or is it outdated? Or is it rooted in something I've earned or something inherited? Second, we look for testability. Intuition is not invalidated by rational analysis. It is clarified by it. When intuition and logic align, you're more likely to be operating from integration. When they diverge, you're likely to be missing context. And then third, we differentiate between signal and sediment. So what part of this internal guidance is fresh insight and what part is a silt from years of unexamined belief? And this process of epistemic hygiene, regularly evaluating the sources and structure of our own internal guidance, is not just an intellectual practice, it's an existential one. It is how the self stays honest. So, the myth of the inner voice is comforting because it tells us we already know. It tells us that we only need to just listen. It's an easy solution. But true authority doesn't emerge from listening alone. True authority emerges from discernment and from integration and from the long, sometimes difficult project of figuring out what in us is real, what in us is reactive, and what in us still needs revision. Your inner voice is not the final answer. It is the first signal. And it becomes trustworthy not when it's obeyed blindly, but when it's refined deliberately.